Can you hear me?
No.
Alright. There we scheduled the ALT presentations during nap time. I'll try to be entertaining as possible. One of the #1 complaints that I hear from ALTs is that they don't know enough about English grammar to explain things to their students. And one of the #1 complaints that I get from JTEs is that teaching English grammar in English is very difficult. So I have some good news for people who have those complaints. And that is, you're doing it wrong. My name is Alex. I ate peanut butter for lunch. And I'm going to talk about techniques for teaching English. Before I do that, I want you to notice the relaxing blue color that I chose for my title slide. It's supposed to make you feel relaxed. Let me tell a story. Oops, sorry. Let me tell a story. When I was learning to become a language teacher, they had us take a non-Indo-European language class, so something very different from English, because, I don't know, they wanted to put the fear in us, right? That fear that our future students would be feeling when they were learning English. So I took a Persian language class. That is what Persian looks like. And the entire semester, our Persian teacher taught us how to read. So that by the end of the semester, I was able to look at a sentence like that and pronounce all those squiggly lines and dots. But I didn't know what I was saying. All I could do was pronounce it. In the last day of class, our teacher kind of threw us a curveball. She said, okay, take the next 15 minutes and just talk with the person sitting next to you, using any Persian that you may have known or picked up during the semester. And I was like, oh, what do I do? I definitely had the fear in me then. So I decided I was going to sit there silently for 15 minutes. Luckily, the person sitting next to me did know a word Persian, and he turned to me and whispered, "This is going to be a Bozorg problem." Bozorg meaning big. And to this day, Bozorg is the only Persian word that I know. It is the only Persian word that I encountered in an instance of meaningful communication. Meaningful communication is the golden calf of what's called communicative language teaching, CLT. Maybe you've heard of it. This is kind of like the foremost methodology for teaching a language that we know about. There are other methodologies before this one, but this one is ours. I don't want to dwell too long on CLT, but it is our foundation. So I want to cover 5 of the main points of a CLT curriculum. #1, meaning is emphasized. So the work that the words do, the action that takes place when speaking, the function. Next, contextualization. It has to be relevant to our students. It has to be something that they find useful, something that they can use, and something that is interesting to them, and connected to other things that we are teaching and other things that students know. Next, language development is language is developed through repeated trials and errors. I'm going to move my microphone to my tie. So this sounds like common completing sense, right? But I want to draw your attention to the phrase "language is developed." Too often we hear the phrase "language acquisition," or "language is acquired," and it kind of gives the wrong impression, as if it's something that we have that we can give someone else. Like you go into class with your language and you say, "Like, here you go, you're welcome." But that kind of it's not an accurate picture, right? So language is something that's developed in real time. Next, fluency is primary, whereas accuracy is secondary. The key component behind this point is what's called communicative competence. We want our learners to become competent users of language. And that means that if they can formulate a sentence that expresses what they are thinking and feeling, say that sentence to someone else, the person that they are talking to can understand them and formulate a response. the mission accomplished, right? That's communicative competence. Regardless of grammatical accuracy, regardless of how close they are to its pronunciation, any of that stuff. Finally, language. Learning language is learning to communicate. This also sounds like common sense. But these are the 5 points. And learning language is learning to communicate. Kind of begs the question of what learning language isn't, right? So that brings me to my next slide, teaching grammar versus teaching communication. So I want to talk about just teaching grammar classes for a few minutes. At least half the people in the room teach a grammar class probably. If you are teaching grammar explicitly, that means if you are going over grammar rules or using grammatical language like words like verb or subordinate clause or object or something like this, you are giving your students what's called declarative knowledge, the knowing what or the knowing about the language, so that if they encounter a sentence like, I want cake on my birthday, they will be able to identify all the components of that sentence. They'll be able to say, okay, we have the subject here, and we have the verb want, and my object, and prepositional phrase on my birthday. So X plus B plus O plus PP equals algebra, right? Actually, teaching grammar and teaching math are very similar. They both have rules. You practice the rules by doing problems, math problems, grammar problems. There is always a right answer to the grammar problem. And because of that, they are very easy to grade. So a lot of us fall into the trap of only teaching our students declarative knowledge. What we should be doing is teaching them what's called procedural knowledge, and that's the knowing how the language works, so that if they encounter a sentence like, I want cake on my birthday, they will understand what that means, and they will be able to formulate an appropriate response. Now, I don't want to sound like there isn't any room for teaching grammar in a language classroom, because of course there is, but the technique with which we teach it is the utmost importance. So I want to talk about these 2 terms. These are kind of umbrella terms, deductive and inductive grammar teaching. So the deductive approach, this is the one you'll probably be the most familiar with. You will begin class by giving a rule. So you'll have your rule, you'll walk into class and say, okay students, today we're going to learn about passive voice sentences. So you will explain the rule, you take the object, the subject, you switch them around and change verb. And then the students will practice, right? They'll do grammar problems, they'll do repeat after me's, and then you test them to see if they learn the rule. This method of teaching grammar is something that we want to use as seldomly as possible. And I said seldomly, not never, right? I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But I want to talk about a much more communicative way of teaching in grammar classroom. That's using an inductive approach. If you're teaching grammar inductively, you do not start with a rule. You have the students discover the rule on their own by leading them to it through the language. So you would actually begin your class with example sentences. So you would write passive voice sentences on the board, have them make observations. They can do this in pairs, they can do this in a group. They can make any observations they want. They could be right, they could be wrong. Just get a list of good observations on the board and then funnel it down. Give them counter examples. Show them active voice sentences. Have them make more observations, have them compare, have them discuss, and have the students establish the final rule. As you can see, the inductive diagram is much more complicated than the arrow diagram, and therefore it is better. I'm joking, but the inductive approach is much more communicative, it's much more student-centered, and you're teaching your students how to think about language. But like I said, you shouldn't never use a deductive approach. If you're in the middle of a lesson and the question of form comes up, a grammar question, you don't have to drop everything you're doing and put example sentences on the board and go through motion. If you can quickly explain the rule and then move on, that's probably more valuable. So it's a judgment call. But when you are planning your lessons, plan to give an inductive lesson. This is a pyramid. Pyramids are cool. I'm going to change pace away from grammar for a little bit and just talk about, this is the percentages that of learning that take place in different kind of classroom practices. So if you look at the top of the pyramid, for example, lecture, if you're talking at your students, they're only learning about 5% of what you're saying. Down a little bit further, you see audio visual. This is what I'm doing right now. You will only learn about 20% of my presentation. But look down the bottom, right? This is where it gets juicy. Like practice by doing, teaching others, immediate use, 75 to 90% learning. That's phenomenal. So we want to stay at that juicy bottom. Juicy learning. So how do we do that? We have to work with the tools that we're given. So some of us might have books that look like this, or other teaching materials. This is an example of a grammar book that's used in a communications class. As you can see, grammar points, it's a little blurry, sorry, grammar exercises, there is a translation for everything, so the students don't even have to read the English. And down at the very corner, you can see like a use it. How do you use it? They write 3 sentences. So there's really no communication that's taking place. So how do you take a tool like this and make it more communicative? Well, you have to adapt it, right? So let me talk about a few ways to adapt your teaching materials. One is, the first thing that should come to mind is use games, right? This is probably something that we're all familiar with, especially from our communications classrooms where we have fun activities like games. They're all over Google. I found this game in about 5 seconds. It's a board game, so it's student-centered, and it's highly adaptable. You can put anything you want into those white squares. You land on a square, they can ask a question, they can use a word or a phrase in a certain amount of way, or they can have a short conversation about why robots are better than dinosaurs. Anything that you want. Secondly, information gaps. These things will blow your mind if you don't know about them. They're like the chocolate chip banana pancakes of the ESL classroom. They have everything. They cover all 4 skill areas. They do the speaking, the listening, the reading, and the writing. And let me explain how they are organized, if you don't know. One student will have some information that the other student needs, and vice versa. They have to communicate to get the information that they need. So they're reading the information that they have, they're speaking to the other student who is listening and then writing that information down. Once they have their puzzle completed, they can go on to complete a different task. And then they can even go on to complete a 3rd task if you want. Again, highly adaptable to pretty much anything you want to teach. And these are also all over Google. So if you take one thing away from my presentations, to go home and Google information gaps. Thirdly, personalize it. My grammar book is all about Emily and Kaito and their adventures in some museum that does not exist. Rewrite the script. Use the students' names. Use places that they are familiar with. Instead of talking about the museum, talk about Sanamia Station. If the students feel that this is something that they could use and that it makes it more personal, it'll be more interesting for them. Lastly, this might be the most challenging thing, especially in a Japanese classroom, but don't be afraid to adjust the role of the teacher. I mean, like, the students are in the habit of seeing the teacher as the source of knowledge, but don't be afraid to step back and take on a different role as an observer or a moderator or something like that. Lastly, I want to talk about teamwork. Obviously, none of these things will work without effective teamwork. Effective teaching and effective teamwork are equals. So, set your phasers to teamwork. Number 1, to have effective teamwork, you have to have mutual respect, right? JTs and ALTs both bring valuable resources into the classroom. JTEs, you guys usually have much more experience teaching. You have a better grasp of methodology. You have a better understanding of the students and culture. ALTs, you have an intuitive grasp of the English language. You can know when something doesn't sound quite right immediately. And a lot of us are kind of new to teaching, probably less than 5 years or so. And that gives us a lot of creative energy. So we both have valuable things to contribute. Next is to know the year's curriculum. Know what your students need to have learned by the end of the year and what your goals are by the end of the year, and this will help you plan ahead. Communication. Talk about activity ideas early, like really early, like at least a week ahead of time. So often I hear people that go up to their JTs or the JTs approach the ALGs 5 minutes before class and are talking about what they're going to do. So communication is key. I know that everybody's extremely busy, but part of the reason they're busy is because they're scrambling to come up with Classroom ideas. Lastly, be flexible, compromise. There's no I in team. It's all about equality. And hug. Hug at least 3 times a day. Summary. Teaching communication by having students communicate. That means that in the classroom, the students are formulating sentences on their own, however complex those might be. It could be something simple like I like potato. They can speak those sentences to another student. That student can understand them and formulate a response, right? That's what communication is. Try not to teach grammar rules. Try to have your students figure it out by using the language. Studies have shown that students that graduate from a grammar class and students that graduate from a communicative class perform equally well on grammar tests. So the fact that we're worried about entrance examinations shouldn't be an issue. Don't be afraid to mess around with a book or any other teaching materials that are given to you. In fact, I encourage it, right? Each of our situations is unique. We need to make our materials fit our unique students. Lastly, teamwork. None of this will matter without effective teamwork. That is all. These are the doctors that I consulted to help make the presentation. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or want to have a discussion, that's my email address. Don't be afraid to email me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex. Next, we're going to hear